on, man!
Welcome back to the Imaginary Gallery. It's TJ, your host. Tonight is a viewer question. This comes from Down the Rabbit Hole, Bill. Or is that Bill down the rabbit hole? Question: please explain what is approach avoidance repetition compulsion and how a normal person is abused by it when it is done to them. Give examples, situations, so that we can clearly understand there is not much of this on YouTube. Please. And how this affects children, friends, and family. Now, there are several terms combined here, so I think the best thing to do is to go over each of the terms first. Approach avoidance, coming from wikia.org. Approach avoidance conflict or choices between something positive, such as going out to a party, and also something negative, such as being punished for going. The decisions involved in this and the emotional state of ambivalence can cause stress. The approach avoidance occurs when an individual moves closer to the seemingly desirable object, only to have the potentially negative consequences of contacting that object push back against the closing behavior. The negative consequences are only imagined so that it is frequently the patterning of fear that creates the problem. Approach avoidance conflicts occur when one goal contains both positive and negative characteristics. So the person's actually fearing something that they also desire. When that goal is far away, both the positive and the negative feelings about the goal are less strong. However, when this person approaches this goal, the feelings about the negative characteristics arise and cause the person to back down, avoiding getting too close to achieving the goal. Then as the goal gets further away, this person approaches it again, only to have the same feelings of avoidance, and then backs off again, which decreases the internal conflict. Balance and ambivalence is achieved. Repetition compulsion, which I'll be referencing an article from Mind Journal called Repetition Compulsion. Why do we repeat the past? Starts with a question. Have you ever asked yourself, why does so-and-so keep going for the same type of partner even though their parents were abusive? It may be a repetition compulsion. What exactly is repetition compulsion? According to this article, it's a Freudian concept on which we seek the familiar. It's described as the desire to return to an earlier state of things. It's a neurotic defense mechanism, an attempt to rewrite our histories. Imagine you are exposed to an abusive pattern with the primary caregiver, and at the time of exposure, you lack power. You have no control to change the situation. You might find yourself repeating that trauma and its circumstances as an adult. Imagine that you're a little kid and you have something to say to parents that you've thought through and you think is intelligent. You're met with indifference or lack of concern. So you begin to think that your insights aren't worth much because they're ignored. So in your later dating life, you may come across someone who is interested in your concerns. Like you may say something just out of the blue and this person would say, oh yes, and they'd join in based on what you said. That may be uncomfortable for you. You may steer clear from that person because unconsciously you're used to someone not listening to you. It may end up attracting you towards a partner who doesn't really listen to you, but gives you other things. Like the narcissistic creature would shower you with love bombing and the idealization, and you might think, good, this person doesn't listen to what I say so I can feel at home, even though it's not a healthy feeling, it's something you're used to. The article goes on to state that this type of concept works well when it's repeating positive cycles or helpful, healthy behaviors, but it runs us into a little difficulty if we're repeating behaviors that lead to toxic relationships and various types of abuse. The theory, according to Freud, was that this compulsion is led by the death drive. Theoretical understandings of this compulsion are that we return to what's familiar in times of stress and we repeat negative patterns because it's more predictable to locate yourself there, even if it doesn't work. And then they give another example. A child may witness a parent who's abusive, and the child may feel helpless, rejected, and without control. In later life, this person may seek to have control in adult relationships and try to counter that rejection and receive the love that was denied them in childhood. Unfortunately, the need to get this corrective experience can lead us to gravitate to dysfunction. We all have the need to heal our inner child, Doing this often keeps us from letting that child go, and we regress instead. This perpetuates the cycle of destructive relationships, and we don't reach the attachment need and are left feeling even more abandoned, rejected, helpless, and out of control. They can end up seeking a partner to acquire the feeling of being in control and fixing the childhood experience, and in our attempts to receive the love that was denied, we can often deny our own feelings to achieve that love. Another outcome can be the person repeating behavior they witnessed and becoming abusive themselves towards others, or self-harm, addiction, high-risk behaviors. In order to feel a sense of control, this becomes a dangerous reenactment of abuse. From another source, unsplash.com, these repetitive compulsions cause destruction and pain. They can be most apparent in the types of relationships we participate in, particularly those that are dysfunctional. Despite knowing they're destructive, we continue to demonstrate a pattern of these types of relationships. Players are different, but the game itself is essentially the same. If you notice these patterns in your own life, there are ways to get help. You don't have to break the cycle alone. Their explanation of this is the problem for many individuals who suffer from repetitive compulsions or behaviors is the lack of one singular explanation or cause for them. In many cases, the issues behind these behaviors are so deeply rooted within that they've become an unconscious response, which undermines any relationship. Fear of intimacy is part of this. With that fear, we tend to put up defenses that are meant to keep others at an arm's length. Over time, it means the relationships in your life lack intimacy because of the roadblocks your behaviors created. While we may make choices on an unconscious level that influence our behavior in relationships, repetitive compulsion goes deeper than that. It's a neurotic defense mechanism, an attempt to rewrite our history by redrawing key relationships and denying our feelings of frustration, hurt, disappointment, anger, and depression. Think about the relationships you have had with your opposite sex parent. If that early relationship was full of rejection, abandonment, abuse, or neglect, you would have needed to find a way to survive that rejection on a psychological level. For children, the main coping mechanism involves denying your current reality and feelings and focusing instead on how you can win the love of that rejecting parent. This can mean changing who you are as an individual or suppressing your real feelings and thoughts, all in an attempt to have a loving relationship. When your efforts don't yield the desired result, you create a set of behaviors to deal with that disappointment and continue using those behaviors in relationships going forward. What's the impact of this? Well, the need to get it right means that these people tend to gravitate to relationships and circumstances that mimic the ones where they didn't feel acceptance and love. There's an unconscious thought process that seems to say that if they keep at it, eventually they'll get it right and finally have the love and acceptance they crave. However, the behavior related to the emotional wounds gets replayed as well, so there's never really a resolution. Instead, the emotional wounds get compounded as the relationships fail. They are then likely left feeling abandonment and at fault again. Since we continue to believe that we can find the right way to satisfy the other person, we refuse to acknowledge that our emotional wounds keep us from finding peace in our relationships because we can't let go of the inner child who believes they are at fault for the choices of someone else. We perpetuate that damage into the lives of those around us as adults. In short, it's a seemingly endless, vicious cycle. Now, one of the main reasons these people say for this repetitive compulsion is that it's often a form of self-soothing. You can ease away anxiety or tension that we may feel in a relationship. When you find yourself repeating a behavior, ask yourself these key questions. What's your emotional state at the time? Do you fear being punished or rejected? Are you anxious and tense during your interactions with this person? You may find that your response is particularly motivated by a need to self-soothe, much in the way a child does when they suck their thumb or snuggle next to a teddy bear for comfort. Part of the reality of these repetition behaviors is that you are attempting to revisit a past emotional condition and relive it to gain a positive emotional experience. Or you may be trying to rewrite it, hoping to achieve a different emotional response or outcome this time around. Of course, this result isn't possible, but you find yourself not dealing with the original emotional wounds and instead continue to inflict more emotional wounds upon yourself. As far as understanding your defenses, it might seem that we've healed and attempted to grow. In reality, when we're under pressure, we may easily find ourselves in a position where our current anxieties become overwhelming. Once that happens, it's easy to go back to square one and regress into those repetitive compulsions that are familiar and comforting. However, these behaviors can be very destructive and are represented by our poor choices or physical behaviors that put us in harm's way. And they give a few examples of destructive defenses and how they can negatively impact current current relationships. Harm to others. Reenactment of violence that was done to us is one way of dealing with the past hurts. For instance, studies have shown that criminals have often been physically or sexually abused as children. They were victims once, and when they became adults, they perpetuate that victimhood onto others. Self-destructiveness. Those who have been abused as children tend to take their hurt and anger out on themselves. These behaviors can include cutting, biting, addiction to drugs and alcohol, as well as eating disorders. Essentially, self-destructive behaviors can be related to primitive behavior patterns that often come from painful or abusive experiences. Re-victimization. In another study, findings indicate that children who were victims of sexual and physical abuse tend to be re-victimized in adulthood. Additionally, they are more likely to end up in situations where they are faced with abuse again. Violence in marital relationships. Different studies of family violence have found a direct relationship between the severity of childhood physical abuse and marital violence later on in life. Essentially, those people who are exposed to violence in childhood find their way back to it as adults. They expect it, seeing it as a normal part of life. The reality is that without taking the time to address the traumas in your childhood, it's entirely possible that your unconscious mind will prime itself to repeat the negative behaviors learned from the trauma. For example, a girl who grew up in an abusive household may be more attracted to controlling partners and find herself trapped in an abusive marriage. There's a source of rawpixel.com addressing the trauma and repetitive compulsion. For those who have dealt with trauma or relationships that were less than ideal, it can be easy to slip off into the world of victimhood, which you just assume this is your destiny and living this way is a fact of life. However, it doesn't have to be this way. Part of the process is working to address those past hurts, acknowledging what happened in your past and making conscious choice not to allow those hurts to impact your future decisions and relationships. At the same time, you'll have to address any coping mechanisms or negative behaviors that you engage in. These self-destructive behaviors can have far-reaching negative consequences if you do not replace them with healthier coping mechanisms. If there's addiction or self-harm, to address emotional issues, it's important to seek professional help to be able to address and understand the underlying causes behind the addiction, and a licensed therapist or counselor can help with that. This repetitive compulsion is a coping mechanism, but it's just a band-aid solution, since it only masks the deeper issue that needs to be addressed. To heal and get better, you must work with therapists, this person says. Part of the process of healing is to admit that you're not the reason your parents or significant other chose to be distant or abusive. You must acknowledge they made their own decisions and emotional responses. Recognize that your actions had little to do with the choices they made. You must understand you have value, and there's no way you could have behaved any better to make it better. Abuse would happen regardless, and that's just like with your narcissistic creature. We often think it's our fault, but then we think about it and realize, when I met this creature, I was me. I showed everything about me. The person loved it. I went along with it. I thought, wow, we get along great. And then this person, later on, decided to change. And all of a sudden, it hated all the things it loved before. And now it's out the door. That is not your fault. You were not wearing a mask like they were. You were presenting yourself because you thought it was a real situation. When you do that, you're being genuine. And if you're dealing with a fake who tricked you, as a result, you get rejected or it leaves you, discards you, it's easy to sit and look in the mirror and think, what did I do? That's the wrong question to ask. There's no answer you can find, except you accidentally got involved with a con artist who decided to take advantage of you, a predator. And you can't even blame yourself with that, even if you suspect them of being one. I've known numerous occasions where I noticed the really sweet, nice behavior instantly, and I'd say, you're fake! You're a fake, aren't you? And they'd always say,
oh no, I'm real, this is who I am!
And they desperately try to pretend like, I've got a problem thinking people are fake because they're nice. And guess what? Later on, they turned out to be a fraud. If you've got something they want, they will resist and say that they're not fake. And say,
oh, you're crazy for saying that.
But then, eventually, you'll get to the point where you were right if you're dealing with one of these creatures. This article says that realizing that you need to get help can be scary, and reaching out and asking for help can be nerve-wracking. The first step towards changing your circumstances and turning the page to a brighter future begins with treatment and healing. You must rebuild your self-confidence and acknowledge that the unknown is part of life and not necessarily a bad part. It can be, but also it can be a good part. The article gives suggestions, online therapy, and talks about some counselors. Assuming your meaning, there's not much about these terms altogether. Repetitive compulsion and approach avoidance. I looked and I found very little of the combination, but there is information for each one separately as I broke down the definitions. The approach avoidance, for example, I met this person a long time ago who I thought, this is the one, this is it, oh, it's perfect, and was very young, but was thinking this is going to be the one. Oh, sick luck in the past with these fools, this this is it. And the person reacted as if it was mutual, and I was overjoyed. But then I kept noticing this person running off to other people secretly, and then later claiming it didn't mean anything. And I'd think, okay, what's going on here? Why are you even doing that if you're enjoying what we're having here? And it gave the illusion of the approach avoidance, because you could say to yourself, this person wants to get serious, but the person's afraid for some reason. That's why it's running off with these meaningless encounters. And then we get the idea that we're going to help them. At least I see what's going on here. You just are afraid because of whatever reason. They may give you any number of reasons, excuses, and you may think that they have this approach avoidance issue. And the more you try to help them, they're just spinning your wheels. I'm who I am. You don't know who I am. And you are thinking in good faith that you're going to help this person. And often, if you're dealing with a narcissistic creature, your efforts will be wasted because they know who they are. They've been very careful to try to hide who they are from you, but eventually you figure out certain things they're doing, and they won't always say it to you in reality terms, so you have to step back and think, okay, this person says she loves me, but she was out last night with 3 different men. She couldn't love me that much. And if you sit her down and say, look, you're not in love with me. If you were, you wouldn't do this. Then you'll get the excuse.
Oh, it just happened. Oh, I didn't care. I didn't want them. Oh.
Then you have to stop and get a reality check. And think, okay, who goes off with 3 men if they don't want to? I mean, it's very easy to say, no thanks. But these creatures will try to keep you by making such foolish claims if they're faking it. So be aware if you're dealing with someone who you think has this repetitive compulsion, because it may be a smokescreen. But if it's genuine, it can be devastating to you if you're trying to get something serious with the person. And they may give you the flattery and the love bombing, and then pull away, disappear, or act mean to you, and then you'll be confused, thinking, okay, everything was great, and now why are you doing this? And that could be a genuine thing, that they do fear the intimacy, and so they want to mess it up. And when you go away, then they do the sweetest thing ever, and then you melt and think, oh, well, it was just a temporary thing. But be aware, because it's very possible the creature will do the same thing over and over and rely upon your endless supply of forgiveness because you're a nice person, and it isn't. Because a lot of times these creatures just like the fact that they're dealing with a person they know they could never really have in real life. That's why they wear their mask, and that's why they pretend. They pretend to be exactly what you want, so you think, wow, I've looked everywhere and I've never found anyone that's perfect, and you're perfect. Well, it's a fake perfection, which can apply either way, but I don't think there's any perfect answer as far as what you do if you're dealing with that. It can affect you in horrific ways because you may be wanting the one thing and it acts like it does but then doesn't. The best thing to do, I would think, would just be to exit. But I know it's very difficult in many cases because they've tricked you. They've lured you in with their predatory ways, and you're thinking of how great that was. So then when you hear words like this, get away from it. It's not going to work. It's easy to think, oh, but it was so sweet at first. Well, it was sweet at first on purpose. A wicked, evil creature is not going to come to you and say,
Hi, let's get together. I like you.
and then be evil to you because you'll probably run. They will be the sweetest thing ever. They'll be the exact opposite of what they are. It's easy to get lured in. The approach avoidance conflict is something these creatures can pretend to have, where they approach you and act like they want to be with you, but then they pull away. And that can be frustrating for you. Your question involved children, so I would imagine that could be a problem for the child too if, for example, it's a parent or a daddy or a mommy, or it's someone who the child likes and it pulls those tricks. That'll be devastating for the child. And if you're dealing with an approach avoidance person, step back, give them their space, let them figure it out. If they're that messed up, you may not be able to solve the problem for them. Plus, if there is really a problem, the person involved has to actually realize there's a problem and want to fix it. Many times they'll just tell you they have a problem just as an excuse for their horrific behavior, and they expect you to take it. You may find the man or woman of your dreams and think it's great, and then after a few encounters with them, all of a sudden they do the horrific thing, and then they give you the pity play story of,
Well, I only liked you and betrayed you because...
and I told you before, insert any excuse. And then they try to twist it around with gaslighting. If you say, you know what, blank you, and leave, they'll be,
How could you be so heartless to someone like me? I can't help it that I had.
whatever happened.
You didn't have that happen.
They'll deliberately pick something in many cases that you haven't had happen. That way they can use that to justify it. When you say, well, I don't care, you shouldn't be doing these things, they'll say, well,
Well, you don't understand. You haven't gone through this.
But they won't sit there and give you any type of deep discussion of exactly what they went through emotionally, because they don't have real emotions if they're one of these creatures. Now, I've been in a situation where I was approach avoidant just because I was involved in a long-term relationship with a creature that started out wonderful and turned evil. Well, then afterwards, I was interested in contact with others and made contact with others, but at the same time shied away from anybody say, oh, I want to be in love, I want to marry you, oh, right off the bat, because after you've been through over a decade with the same person and you know all the things you've gone through, you know you can't just snap your finger with any old person and just jump in and make something work. And that's what I was feeling. But at the same time, I didn't want to be cut off from the world. But I don't know if this would really be approach avoidance in the terms of it being some kind of severe thing. But I just took it as a lesson learned and to be careful. Plus to think, who is this person I just met? Doesn't this person worry about various things? For example, I could be a serial killer and it doesn't even know it. And it's wanting to move in right now. And then I'll think this person is just a baby. It doesn't know what it's doing. And then I waste all this time thinking about it when really it's just a lying creature. But they don't understand reality in many cases, and they'll just try to make this fairy tale seem like it's real just because they're being phony and nice. If you're dealing with the approach avoidant type person, or if you're referring to a combination of all this together, which sounds like a big mess, offer your assistance. But if you see that it's pointless, I would think the best thing to do is to concentrate on someone else, yourself mainly, because these creatures don't really care about you, really, if they're a destructive creature, because they're just needing you for some role to fulfill for them. And because they don't really usually tell you who they really are, you're not really going to achieve any type of real intimacy, because they can just put on masks, which is different from you, because you were genuine, expecting the same thing, and all you got was usually a copycat. Someone who pretended to be just like you in many cases. The repetitive compulsion and the approach avoidance can blend together, though, in the way I described, and it wouldn't be healthy, as far as I would think, for you or children to have to deal with that. And if you yourself are experiencing these things, then I would look into additional resources, because, as they say, it doesn't have to be that way.
I'm the sexiest, hottest narcopath from your history. I know when we were together, I made such a big deal about us being a couple. I told you I wanted commitment immediately. And I asked for that commitment, but not in an honest manner. I meant for you to commit to me. I don't commit to nobody. I needed you to think I did, so you'd want to be with me and think I'd be the same way. Even though I was still involved with 3 other guys behind your back and 1 woman. I just didn't think you would have known any of this. I know we made love the very first night. It was awfully strange for you to hear me say I wanted to marry you the next day, but I was in a hurry. I just went with what you had and pretended like I loved it all. Fact is, I ain't got no self. When I talked about an emotional connection with you, that ain't possible. You see, I ain't in touch with myself, and that's kind of the first step. So I'm here to connect you to someone else.
You know that saying, if you don't love yourself, you can't love anyone else? I say that one all the time, even though I don't know what it means, because I can't stand myself.
I am a disgusting, rotten, deplorable human being. But I just put some makeup on and snap my fingers, and I put on a mask. And I become whoever you want me to be. When I meet you, I listen carefully, I watch everything, I pick up clues about things you're interested in, things you like. I put those at the top of the list in my brain.
I look at the things that you don't like and the things that scare you, if you're dumb enough to tell me what they are.
And I file those away somewhere else for safekeeping, because I know it's inevitable. I'm going to use all the things I collected in the worst file to get you to be endeared to me, to make it seem like I know you so well. And you're going to fall for it because I'm so effective at doing my thing. But eventually all you figure me out. Someone snoops, someone talks, and I get sick of it. So when that happens, I'm well prepared. Because honey, when we dated, we were in a game from day 1. But you didn't know we were in a game. We didn't find out till really far into it that we were in a game. And by that time, you already losing. I was fighting from day 1. You just didn't need to know that. So I told you, oh no, this is just who I am. Or I just know you're a kind of confidence. It's the first time I've ever fallen in love so quickly. Even though I've been divorced 7 times, which I tried to keep secret, but you and your nosy friends had to find out. Just listen to me, believe me. Otherwise I can't be successful. I need you to buy my lies. Quit snooping, quit checking up on me, quit trying to figure me out. Look, that's what happened to us. and you don't know what you're missing now. You knew it. I'm the sexiest thing out there, and you'll never have me again. I'll say tell me. I am the Narcopath of your weirdest and wildest dreams. I just went to 3 different hospitals in different disguises. I was so excited. I went and I got 3 different COVID-19 vaccines so I'll be safe. And then a few days later, I came down with COVID-19. COVID-19! 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 I'll go! The window go! From the state of Washington to the state of Maine! The doctor said it wasn't the vaccine. I must have been exposed prior to getting it. I believe what they say. This may be my last performance ever, because I'm going to begin it.
Those weren't vaccines. It's experimental gene therapy.
Because they can't make one that big anyway. It takes 7 to 10 years anyways.
Do you have a blood clot?
Are we gonna start this?
Do you have a blood clot?
Knock it off.